somebody somewhere will comment and say, Obama politicized this issue. Well, this is something we should politicize.
President Obama responding with obvious emotion to the latest mass shooting at an Oregon community college and declaring he will push again on the issue of gun control. And we're back now with the panel. Brit, what do you think of the president's comments, both in the immediate aftermath and then again at his Friday news conference, and his intention, he says, to keep talking about the need for tougher gun control?
Well, I don't have any problem with his saying this issue ought to be politicized. Gun control is a political issue. And if the president has an idea that he believes ought to be advanced to try to stop these recurring mass killings, there's nothing at all wrong with his doing so. The problem, I think, is that this is not an issue that has served the Democratic Party very well, as repeated defeats on gun control issues have proven through the years. And furthermore, what he's talking about is he speaks vaguely of common sense measures. Well, what common sense measures does he mean? It looks to me as if the kind of gun control that he likes is the kind that they've tried in Australia, for example, where they confiscated guns. You couldn't pass that through either house of the Congress with full Democratic control of both houses. So I think it's a quixotic mission, but I don't have any problem with his talking about it.
Julie, from the little that we actually know of facts about this terrible case, all 14 of the guns that the shooter had gotten, he had bought legally. He apparently had no criminal record, no mental health record. Does it give the White House any pause that any realistic law that they could pass probably wouldn't have made any difference in this case?
They try to talk about this in a broader way, not looking at specifically this law would have stopped this incident. They say, and the president has said this repeatedly, that he thinks the problem is just the broad availability of guns, whether they're purchased legally or not legally. You know, to Brit's point here, the president is really lacking in specifics about what he wants to do moving forward other than simply talking about it. And I think that really underscores the political position he finds himself in. I don't think we're going to see him launch a big push for legislation on Capitol Hill. I don't think we're really going to see him pushing state legislators or governors to do anything. He, I think, simply is going to be talking about this because he knows that the political dynamics haven't changed since he last launched this effort.
I want to put up a remarkable figure on the screen. The shooting that took place in Oregon was on the 274th day of 2015, and according to a website called Mass Shooting Tracker, it was the 294th mass shooting in those 274 days, and they define mass shooting as one in which 4 or more people, including the shooter, were hit. Which raises the question, Ben, can we do anything about it?
You know, it was interesting to listen to the president saying what he said the other day, because from my perspective, if you actually think through this process, if you take logically the steps that he's saying and assume for the sake of argument that he's correct, that his policies are popular, they're common sense, they're constitutional, and that the only thing that's preventing them from going through is the intransigence of the Republicans or the gun lobby or some other effect, there's actually a problem with that, because this president, when he came to office, he had the House, he had the Senate, he had his own party there. He could have had any gun legislation that he wanted at that point that he was willing to push through. And so I think that when it comes time to sort of actually assess what kind of gun policy we have in the country, the president needs to look in the mirror. He's making this about him, but I think it really is about him. He chose instead to go the healthcare path, to pass Obamacare, to use his political capital in different ways. And so now when he complains about this, I mean, the fact is, it was a Democratic Senate after Newtown that killed his approach to gun legislation. I don't think that this is something that really stands up along the logic of what he's saying when you really think about it.
Christi, how would they respond to that at the White House?
Well, I think they would say that the president had a limited amount of political capital and only a 2-year period where he had the kind of latitude that you're describing. And when it comes to trying to pass something through the Senate, it's a difficult issue. Not all Democrats are supportive of these gun safety measures that the president was pushing.
We asked you for questions for the panel, and we got this on Facebook from Eric Florak. He writes, "The shootings in Oregon and the amount of dead ends up being an average weekend in Chicago." But you never hear the president talk about that. Christi, how do you answer Eric and this complaint that you hear from a lot of people that the president's outrage on this issue is selective?
That's an interesting question. I don't think it's true that he doesn't talk about gun violence in Chicago. I think he has talked about it quite a bit. In fact, you remember not long ago, a 15-year-old girl, Hadia Pendleton, was killed in Chicago, an innocent bystander to gun violence in a gang conflict. I think what the president...
I think it's fair to say, though, that he does seem to focus more on these big mass shootings and not the steady drumbeat of gang violence in a city like Chicago.
Yeah, I think when he talks about the urban violence, there are other factors that he tries to attack, like his My Brother's Keeper initiative, and some of the rhetoric and his personal mission about that I think will continue long after he's in office. But I do think that he sees these mass shootings as a separate thing with a different dynamic pushing them. And it's a dynamic in the case of gang violence, he feels like he's got policy prescriptions that he can push, or at least talk about. When it comes to mass shootings, I think he's increasingly reaching the point, like many people, including people, this was embedded in your question, who just feel like there's not an obvious solution to attacking this incredible growing problem.
In the time we have left, then, is there a solution?
I don't think that there is. Evil people will always exist. They will do evil things. It's much more difficult to come up with a policy solution for dealing with a maniac, a lunatic like this fellow who attacked people for their faith, was clearly, embarked on a murderous rage, than there is, I think, dealing with the problem of crime and in the inner
Julie,
city.
I know that after Newtown and after some of these, the president has talked not only about the gun control aspect of it, but also the mental health aspect of it. And I must confess ignorance on this. Has anything happened there so that you have more mental health intervention, more of a connection between gun purchases and mental health records?
You've seen some tweaks around the edges. You've seen the president signing some executive orders trying to move the ball forward, but nothing in a really major way. And certainly when you do look at a lot of these mass shootings, that's one thing that really stands out. And I think that it's also one area where you actually have some common ground between Democrats, Republicans, gun control advocates, and those who don't want to see more legislation. Mental health does seem to be something where you could potentially see progress made.
So Brit, going back to something that Ben said in the previous panel segment, you had Jeb Bush get hammered this week by a bunch of people for saying stuff happens, and sometimes you just can't find a solution for it, and perhaps stuff happens wasn't the most elegant way to put it. But what do we do? Is there anything we can do, or do we just have to accept that this is going to happen and there are limits to what government can do?
Well, it's a law enforcement issue. It's also, as you and Julie were talking about, a mental health issue. I don't think the president or anyone on his side of the equation, or really any of the Republicans, is being very bold or creative about articulating possible ways to address these things. The mental health issue is obviously a problem. This guy probably should not have been on the streets. He was evidently in pretty bad shape. It's a tricky thing to do, but it's not, I think, mission impossible. What we need from the president is some kind of a balanced approach to the issue, and that would be true of Hillary Clinton or anyone else running for president. We're not hearing that. It's not an easy problem, but I think it would be helped by at least some thoughtful new ideas on the subject.
And just very quickly, you say he shouldn't have been on the street. He hadn't been incarcerated. He hadn't committed a crime. So
the question is, what's a thoughtful way to get at that? I don't have the answer, but I think there probably is an answer.
All right. Thank you, panel. This will obviously be a subject we continue to discuss, and see you next Sunday.